I'm Ben McAdams. You're listening to Both Sides of the Aisle. I represent the political center, and I'm joined by Dan McKay on the right.
Center. It's Dan McKay on the right. Hi, everybody.
And Shireen Ghorbani on the left.
Hello, and hey, listeners. So glad you're with us, and thanks for joining us, Ben.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to fill in. It's always great to be with you all.
So just as a quick reminder for folks who maybe don't know you, just a little bit about your background.
Okay, so, and we're recording today up at the Utah State Capitol, which reminds me of my initial public service. I served in the Utah State Senate, and then I was elected mayor of Salt Lake County, and then most recently served in the United States Congress. And now I have the, I think, wonderful benefit of being out of public service, Senator McKay.
You miss it. Come on.
I do. I miss the job I had. I don't miss the job that you have.
Okay.
It's changed a little bit.
That's fair.
But look, let's dive right in. Speaking of that, it's been a chaotic week in our nation's capital, starting with, I think most recently, a freeze of all government funding, international and domestic funding. And right before we started recording this, we saw a news alert that said that the freeze was unfrozen. What does this mean?
Well, a new administration came in, and feel like their mandate was to right-size government and make things, I guess, match the agenda that Trump was elected on. And so I think what you saw with the spending freeze was, and there were little et cetera things running around social media about, something woke or, some foreign aid. The funny one that was debunked was like 50,000 condoms or something like that for Gaza, which, that was debunked because those are always entertaining. But, you look at this administration and what they're trying to do is reset the tone and say you should not have an expectation that things will run the exact same way. And it was interesting at the state level to also see reactions, Sophia DeCaro, who's, who does the governor's budget, and also our folks are like, okay, what does this mean for the $7.7 billion that the state receives to run programs? And that was a stressful moment.
Yeah, and what kind of programs are we talking about?
Well, for the most part, when you freeze something like that, the biggest things that you're talking about is Medicaid. And Medicaid through the state budget is probably the biggest influence. And, but the Trump administration was very clear that the Medicaid expenses weren't included in the freeze. And there was like some questions. All those things being equal, they made it clear that it wasn't going to apply to benefits for individuals, but that it was going to apply more to grant programs and things that are internal government operations. Whatever it was, I love the idea that they ran out there and grabbed some headlines, changing the nature about how things are funded, and then do what they always do, which is just moderate things a little bit,
I mean, as somebody who's been both in the legislative branch and the executive branch, I always support taking a close look at government spending. Is it necessary? Is it accomplishing the goals that we set out to accomplish? But I have to say this was just chaos and really put a lot of people's lives, upended a lot of people's lives, people who I hear were getting medical treatments or other things and had their treatments canceled. And so, is this what we can expect over the next 4 years with this Trump administration? Is it, there's good policy, and I'm not I think that good policy can come from Donald Trump, as much as I didn't vote for him and am not happy about his, election. I'm willing to look at ideas on their merits and search for good ideas coming from this president, but chaos is something different.
Yeah, chaos is something different. And I guess I'll just also add that many of these programs, though I think we could certainly get in the weeds. I think there were 2,600 different programs that were listed that were frozen, which I think people should really understand is a cut. Like that's what they wanted to do. It is unsuccessful in the moment, but we're talking about everything from food assistance, school lunch programs, organizations that support folks with disabilities are often funded through pass-through grants that come to our state federal grants that come to our state that go to organizations. I am on the board of the YWCA. The conversations we were having around domestic violence and the dollars that again come to the state. And I think people need to really wrap their brains around, as much as we hear, this sort of anti-federal government sentiment from some of our legislative leaders up here. It is almost 30%.
You can blame me.
It's you.
That's okay.
But it's about 30% of our budget. And I do think that I have to say, there are certainly things that I would like to see the state doing to do more for folks who are poor and living on the margins. But I do think that we execute those dollars really responsibly in this state. And I do find it incredibly frustrating that what is feels blatantly unconstitutional is just kind of our norm now, right? Like we're accepting this as normal behavior from our president. And I totally understand the desire to really go look at these things line by line, but this kind of chaos disrupts in a way that is not constitutional or productive.
Ben, do you remember how much spending in the federal level is discretionary?
Very little, right?
Very little,
yeah.
right?
I mean, if you take out military spending and then the entitlement program, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, it's very little.
Yeah, it's very little, right? And I think that's the part that, I think the president realizes, and really every member of Congress talks about right-sizing the budget and how they want to spend the money in the most efficacious way. I think that's pretty consistent across both aisles. Maybe they're different about how they want to spend it. But the one thing that is clear is Washington has very little discretion over the spending that it has.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't necessarily agree with you that all chaos is bad.
Checks.
Like things.
Checks knowing you.
Things change.
Yeah.
And, you just have to. I honestly will say some of our most brilliant thinking as a country, some of our most brilliant events come as a response to emergencies. And whether or not you create an emergency, which is what the Trump administration was doing, I don't know if that's really a great idea, but at the same time, maybe we can, take some of those evaluative looks at some of those things that we couldn't otherwise.
Yeah, I think just a really important part of this, though, is like when you look at, you made an important point, right? Like, why are they doing this? Why are they trying to cut this budget? What are they looking for these dollars for? And I think for me, I think this is something I'm frustrated with, as Democrats as well, right? As I don't want to see just an ever increasing military budget. I certainly don't want to see tax cuts for billionaires, but we know that that's a priority for this administration. But we can move on to another topic.
So, I was just going to say, is Donald Trump a genius who's playing chess, or is he a child who's just reacting to his core emotions and it just happens to work out for him?
I don't know. And I can say that with a straight face. I don't know. From a strategic standpoint, I just know that over and over, he is able to get, the press or whatever to jump on something and then, shape it in a way that he thinks things should be done. What I think is interesting, just looking at that question, is just how it feels exactly the same in some ways as the first administration, but you don't have him saying like every morning we woke up with something that was like this offensive tweet in the first administration where people were like totally distracted by that tweet and he could do other things. Now it seems like people are more focused on things he's doing.
Yeah. And I guess I would say that's Project 2025. They came in with a playbook this time. And the folks around Trump the first time were, I think, people who were maybe traditionally more committed to the sense that our democracy works or that our government works. And now we have people that are really in line with a specific agenda that I just have to continue to remind people, many things that are largely unpopular with the American people, cutting access to things like Medicaid, reducing our investments in infrastructure, looking for ways to privatize more and more parts of government. People don't like these approaches.
Well, my opinion is he's clearly an attention monger and he's very good at it.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know that this is that he's in a sophisticated manner playing chess, but I think he just wants to have at every moment the attention on him. And I think the best thing you can do is probably, not take the bait, as Senator McKay was saying, from 2016 to 2020, it was every morning and it was exhausting. I was in Congress during that time. And it was exhausting to always think about what do we have to say to the latest outrageous thing that the president has done. Mm-hmm. And, I have to think that maybe the best thing we can do is just not feed the beast, just ignore, I don't, there's such important things going on that I don't think we can ignore some of these actions and the impact it's going to have on real people. But, I think let's dial down the reaction again and just not feed him what he's looking for, which is constant attention.
And I know that it sounds maybe, because this is I know that I'm talking to somebody who's tuning into a political, weekly news review, but there's a lot that can be done in your community that can, I think, feel pretty empowering in this time, given how out of control things feel at the federal level. You can sign up, you can get involved, you can start doing work in your community that makes you more connected to the problems that are right in our own backyard.
Well, and I would just say, really the issues that are going to have the most immediate impact on our lives are not happening in Washington, D.C. I think, this last week maybe aside. So I look forward to the next segment where we're going to be talking about local issues. And we've got a Utah State Senator here with us who can fill us in on some of the things that are happening at the legislature. You're listening to Both Sides of the Aisle. I'm Ben McAdams. I'm here with Senator Dan McKay and Shireen Ghorbani. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Both Sides of the Aisle on Utah Public Radio. We love to hear from listeners like you. If you would like to send us a comment, email bsotapodcast@gmail.com. That's bsotapodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Shireen Ghorbani on the left.
Dan McKay on the right.
And I'm Ben McAdams in the political middle. You're listening to Both Sides of the Aisle. Let's start talking now about some of the state legislative issues. We are right now just finished, we're starting the second week of the legislative session.
Today's day 9.
Today's day 9 when we're recording this, right?
Close.
And a lot is happening. It seems like the pace of these sessions are just moving faster and faster, right? And I was talking to some interns up here. Shout out to Madeline Christensen, who I know, who's interning for Representative Lisenby.
Awesome.
She says that already day 1 feels like day 30 is what people are telling her. So it's jumping right into the deep end, right?
Yeah.
But a lot going on. So I think the first thing we want to talk about is a bill to end collective bargaining for public workers. And that has now passed the House and is moving its way to the Senate.
Yeah, it's over in Senate committee this afternoon, and will be debated in Rev and Tax today.
So somebody walk us through what this is. What is collective bargaining, and what does this legislation do?
Yeah. So, what I can say is when the House sponsor has to stand up and just assure people how for workers he is, I think you've lost the thread, right? So the idea is that a union is why we have 8-hour workdays and worker protections on the weekends, and collective bargaining is the process by which union members work with, management, whatever the leadership of the organization or entity that they're in, to get protections, benefits when we think about wage increases, cost of living, all those kinds of things. So we think about actually now as a moment when unions have kind of had a resurgence in our country. And I think people are really seeing the power of investing in worker organizing. And I'll also add that this is a right to work state, and it has been since I believe the 80s. So this is an interesting moment when unions that are, finding reasons to still organize and still bring people together, even in a right to work state, which basically means you get the benefit of a union, but you don't have to pay the dues. Those challenges that people are already facing here have now only become more challenged by this legislation. So, I think ultimately we should be concerned when we're seeing advances of legislation that make it harder for workers to get their fair shake.
I'll just say when I was mayor, collective bargaining was a process that we went through when I was developing my budget. We're trying to decide how much of a cost of living increase we're going to give to our employees, what our retirement package looks like, different things like that. And it was really helpful as a mayor to, you've got 3,000 employees and you don't really know how those employees are going to feel about something. So to have organized representatives who I could sit down with, tell them what we're thinking, get feedback from them. They didn't always love what I was doing. In fact, at times they were very upset about what I proposed, but I had some mechanism to engage with my employees in a more structured way to get their appetite and their feedback on things we're proposing. I always felt that it was very helpful and constructive to the process. So tell us what this legislation is doing.
Yeah, the relationship between labor and the employer is always this interesting balance. And, the Democrats, for the most part, have had a lot of support of labor. And, historically, you see Trump actually surprisingly has this crossover. And then, the Republican
some
side.
Representatives in the state.
Yeah, no, that's true. I'd say Tyler Clancy does really well with this. I know he's a member of the Representative Clancy is a member of the police union. But, I think what you've seen is a disappearing membership really at UEA. And it's interesting.
So what is UEA?
Utah Education Association, which is like the state, which is the state education association. And then really under UEA are really, subparts. Each, Davis School District has their own,
DEA. Davis,
DEA. And Jordan has it, they all have their own independent group that then collectively bargains with school districts. But the membership is getting so small, and there are questions on whether or not that, size of being, and some of them are less than 20%, whether or not that, is an appropriate place. Is that group relevant anymore from a bargaining position for employees? One. And, you couple that with, and I can just say that, when we're trying to deal with legislative policy issues up here at the state, frequently we're able to work with let's say there's 10 unions. We're able to work closely with 9 of those unions to get solutions, figure out issues and that kind of stuff. But there's always one that doesn't want to work with others, right?
Yeah.
And just generally just says no and on a regular basis throws up their hands and walks out of the room, out of the negotiating table. And that's the Utah Education Association.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is no surprise to me that the senator is bringing up the Utah Education Association, because I do think this is a baby with the bathwater. This is directed at the Utah Education Association. And I just want to ask, because you mentioned the Fraternal Order of Police, are they included in this?
So I can tell you that right now, how the bill's included is it includes everybody.
I don't think that's, we'll see.
What I'm saying is over time, I think you're going to see the bill change and make some amendments is my gut. Because the process, right? You start out with one position, and I can say this over and over, a sponsor just gets ideas, issues, feedback, meets with constituents. And honestly, I know there's a compromise that's being proposed on the table and everybody's on board except for one.
So if you are concerned about
which one that one is.
You can still reach out to your representation, because when this vote did happen in the House, it wasn't on party lines. A number of Republicans also voted against this. So I would just say that this is still a time to contact your senators about this.
So this legislation, referencing back to when I was mayor, I remember one budget proposal that we had that the public employees unions didn't love. And I remember this incredibly painful town hall meeting where I was eviscerated by my employees. They didn't like that. Still, but the law doesn't require them to approve what I was doing. I felt like it was the right proposal. They did not. It was contentious. I listened. I think the process was better for that. I still moved forward. My council supported my proposal. The employees didn't like it. And we were back at the table the next year talking about budget. It's a constructive process. I don't expect that they're going to agree, but that's just kind of the nature of it. And, they also don't represent 100% of my employees, but I felt that it was meaningful for me to have that relationship with them. What the legislation does is it says that government officials cannot acknowledge or I think even engage with these official organizations. Now, nothing requires you today to agree with them, to follow them. It's just a forum for engaging. And, the rumor mill is that this is being done because the UEA did not support the constitutional amendment to reallocate income tax away from education to the state general fund. And it feels a little bit mean.
Oh, yeah. Coming from you, Ben. Strong words.
A little bit mean.
A little mean.
That's probably the harshest thing I ever heard Ben say.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would say just directly punitive, but
I don't know that that's the case. What you want to make sure is that if there's a labor organization and they represent employees and they're at the bargaining table, that they are supported by the employees and that they have the buy-in from the employees to represent them. And that's really what the bill does. And outside of that, there's drama or feelings about, I get it. I just think if you think about what the policy is that requires really a vote of support from the membership every 5 years, if I remember right. That doesn't seem like it's that draconian.
But this is why the right to work context is important, because you can still get the benefits without having to pay dues. So for many people, I think a reasonable question a working person would ask is, why would I pay the dues? Why would I join if I'm in a right to work state anyway? So I'm just saying there are layers of complication to that.
That's fair.
Well, it feels like the UEA does represent the members who choose to align with them.
Sure.
And there's nothing that requires policymakers to listen to. Well, I think we do listen. There's nothing that requires us to agree with them. And so, is this really a solution? Is this really going to solve a problem where there's no really requirement to they're an advocacy group, right? They don't have to always win. They don't always win. Let's move to a different topic. Social media. This has been a big topic of discussion here at the legislature over several years, particularly as it relates to social media, some of your apps that have engaged in predatory practices as it relates to our kids. There's legislation this year sponsored by Senator Weiler. Senator Weiler, I think, should be commended. I guess I'm tipping my hand as far as where I come out on this, but commended for the work that he's done to be an advocate for greater transparency and protecting our kids from some of these predatory apps. This year, he's sponsoring Senate Bill 142 that would require app stores, namely the Apple App Store and the Google, to verify the age of users who download apps and require parents to give consent for a minor to download a new app to their phone. Yeah.
I guess I would say I think these are always difficult places to find balance, right? And I also would suggest that I feel like it would be useful to have more youth voices kind of involved in some of these things. When I think about the efforts from banning Pornhub to apps to these interfaces, kids are finding ways around them. And so while I think all of these things are good to consider, I also wonder what we're doing in terms of media literacy. How are we, creating an education environment that helps people navigate and understand these? And how are we as like non-young people understanding that kids are still accessing these things, around all of this well-meaning legislation? So I would just say that there should be a public education or public information component of some of these efforts to really help people navigate, because they're getting on anyway.
My hat's off to Shireen for not saying comprehensive sex ed, because I know that it's it's in the back of her mind. She was about to, anyways. I think anything we can do to take. I was recently looking at a report that just showed mental health, self-harm. Like, believe it or not, you are more likely now to be injured by yourself than you are by a car if you're between the ages of 14 and 25, right? And you look at the trends of where this stuff is going, and all those trends and the spikes related to them, guess where they originate? Social media uptick, right? Causation, correlative, I don't know. But at the end of the day, there is clearly abuse that can go on with algorithms into our kids' brains, and just letting them have that playground as a carte blanche without some kind of oversight is not healthy. We know it. Even if it's not 100% causative and we just see a correlative, I just think the more bumpers we can put on this stuff, but it does not go far enough. I mean, the algorithms themselves are quickly outpacing what they can serve to, young people from a content perspective, and shape their thoughts without sometimes the kids even being aware that they're being shaped.
So I know that we're all parents here. Really quickly, did you allow your kids on social media? Like, what age did you?
They got at 16.
16.
They got Facebook.
Yeah.
And that was so that they could communicate with their cousins and that kind of stuff, little stuff. But that was all that was. And past that, they didn't get TikTok. They didn't get Snap. None of those things, till they were paying their phone bill. And so most of my kids, even that are adults, still don't have them.
How about you?
Yeah. My kids at 14 have had access to social media. We have tried to regulate their usage, their time, and how much they use it, and access to these things. And what I found is exactly what Senator McKay was saying, is kids can find a way around it. And I just turned 50. So
Happy
I feel
birthday.
like, thank you. I'm the old guy who can't figure out this darn technology, and I'm sitting there trying to figure out the controls. My kids laugh because, I put passwords on the phone and then I lock myself out of my phone. And I'm bumbling around trying to figure out how to get back into my phone that I intended to time out my kids, and now I can't do work, right?
Well, I got just a little guy, he's 10, so we haven't gotten there yet, but I'm grateful. Like, as long as I can keep him off, I will. But
the longer the better.
I know that you have a special interest, Ben. I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about space.
Oh, yeah. So moving to a different topic. So Senator Jerry Stevenson has a proposal that he wants to see Utah become a space hub, a hub for space travel. So I have to admit, I'm a bit of a nerd. I was on the space committee when I was in Congress. It was one of my favorite nerdy things to do. The newspapers didn't care, the voters didn't care, but I loved it. We got to oversee the NASA budget and get regular briefings on the Artemis mission to the moon and the eventual mission for manned human-powered travel to Mars. I think it's super interesting, and I think so. Senator Jerry Stevenson has stepped out, proposing a study to look at creating access for space launches. And Senator McKay, what do you think about this?
We got a West Desert, and we might as well find a highest best use for the West Desert. I mean, it's out there. It is, we don't have water out there. There's a lot of things. There's not much to burn. So yeah, let's go to space there.
I love this because there is this kind of sense that sometimes places where there isn't anything are the most magical places, right? And imagining just like rocket blast off echoing across some of these valleys is interesting to think about.
Better. That's awesome.
I gotta say, I could be convinced.
So what does it cost to build a spaceport? What do you need?
Oh, that's a great question. That's above my pay grade.
That's probably the intent of this legislation, I guess. And I'm assuming it's not limited. It would be commercial, private, government, military.
Yeah, I don't think there's a limitation on it. I think it's just an open invitation to say, hey, Texas is great, Florida's great, so is Utah.
So I've never seen a space launch. I understand now that there's enough traffic down in Florida that's so frequent that
It is
go and
every.
see it. Yeah.
It is like, and sometimes if you're down there, it's every other day.
Yeah.
So we went to Disney World last time. We watched, I think, 3 launches during that time period. It was like
Incredible.
staggering.
So we may be able to see this right here in our own backyard.
Maybe we'll get that if we don't have a total collapse of our federal government.
Yeah, maybe. We already have
That laugh is not really sincere.
we have a pretty decent aerospace industry here already.
Yeah.
So I think we've got some of the critical
A lot of
infrastructure.
support with Hill Air Force Base, etc.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting, I think, to see where that goes.
Yeah, that's right. Hopefully straight to Mars.
That's right. Well, you've been listening to Both Sides of the Aisle. I'm Ben McAdams. I've been joined by Senator Dan McKay and Shireen Ghorbani. Thank you to our producer, Anthony Scoma, and thank you to you, our listeners.